Thanks everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about the challenge of managing growth for entrepreneurs. Now, managing entrepreneurial growth may be the most critical challenge for the future success of a business enterprise. A fairly famous quote, or at least it's famous for me as I went through this subject and had to think about it overall from my perspective. Basically what I want, when I look at entrepreneurial growth, I looked at there's a huge amount of stuff. It's basically the same as looking at the entire subject again, because you're going from the phase of the startup all the way through to how do you grow an entire company. It's a massive topic, and I looked at many different angles around this. What I wanted to focus on really was looking at both the company and the entrepreneur and how they should actually go about it. So what should the company and the entrepreneur do to actually overcome the challenges that will come from internal and external forces throughout this process? And how should that company and how should that entrepreneur really focus on growth, and what should they do? And really focus on the how they should do it, not just the what. If we look at the what, really what we're talking about here is entrepreneurial strategy. Now, there's a whole bunch of information around this in the text. It really runs through what it all means, what it all, strategy. We've done strategy in our course before. We kind of know what it means. The difference they're saying is really that entrepreneurial strategy is continuously cyclic. Effectively, it continues and it spins around, and effectively the entrepreneur needs to understand their market. They need to keep updating their business model, and generally, it's the start of a process. It's the start of forming a company, the start of forming a venture that could be wildly successful or it could be nothing. There's a lot of information about the what, but I really want to focus about the how. The first part of the how that was touched base on was strategic planning. Effectively, a lot of the text, Frederick especially, talks about strategic planning and the lack of being one of the top reasons that businesses fail, and that they have underperformance versus other, I guess other ventures where planning has been a key focus. That planning really represents the how, which is critically important, along with the what. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is what should the actual company do. So if you talk about a company which is formed out of an entrepreneurial venture, really the leaders in that organization need to really work towards what they call the adaptive business. Now, the adaptive business is a business that remains flexible and able to adapt to the changing company market conditions, flexible to its competitors, flexible to whatever happens in the market. Now, you can imagine that, and I think everyone's probably seen this in companies before, that you have companies who are really flexible. You think about your Googles, you think about possibly your Facebooks, I'm not sure. The companies who really can adapt to changing market conditions. And then you can think about those really rigid companies, and I'm thinking government, I'm thinking other big enterprises where nothing happens, that the company stays the same because it's formed a very rigid business, and we wouldn't call that an adaptive business. Now, the text actually talks in Frederick about how the company can maintain that adaptive business. They talk through 4 different things that the company can do, being they can share that entrepreneurship vision, make sure that the people understand what that company stands for, what the people are here for, and what where the company is going. Second one's increasing the perception of opportunity, which is really making sure that jobs are carefully designed with defined objectives to keep people close to the customer, so they understand the customer, what's happening, and really what they're trying to sell or market and get to the customer. The third is institutionalized change as the venture's goal. So making sure that you build an organization that's not afraid of change. Sort of as I mentioned before, some companies are rigid. That's what they do. They're solid companies. They think about your big manufacturing company where something has to happen and has to happen in that order for things to happen. What we're talking about here is an adaptive company. This is a company where people aren't in jobs for life. They're here to make a difference. The fourth is instill that desire to be innovative. Really what we're talking about there is supporting entrepreneurship, as we've talked about. Setting up reward systems, build an environment that allows for failure with flexible operations, and the concept of venture teams. So for example, have an innovation team. Have people who are set up there to keep that entrepreneurial vision going through the company, to really challenge that status quo, really work on that innovative, adaptive company mindset. Now, in terms of what we actually see in terms of the solar startup, and this is a reading which I really was really interested in, which really is the solar startup which Galati wrote in 2018, and that was really about how can you maintain the soul of your venture as you grow as a company. Now, you can imagine that companies are founded from entrepreneurial ventures with really singular purpose and really strong vision of where they want to get to. And once that spirit persists, you really get high engagement from your staff members. Startups remain agile and innovative, and it really spurs growth. But as you build that company, it gets larger, you hire more people, you build lots of processes, you have input from your investors, from your poor leadership, a whole bunch of things as you get more people in that company that can really cause issues with retaining the soul of the company. And really looking at that, what can you do to keep that that company together? What can you do to get that entrepreneurial venture going forward? And there are some suggestions given as well in terms of how do you retain the soul of the company. And I think they're really strong suggestions in terms of be clear again as to what the business is there for. What its values are. So what is that company there for? What are its values? And when I think about values, the one that always comes to my mind is Google. So Google's value was around don't be evil. And that was their main value for a long time. And actually, they've done so well to institute the soul of that company, it's actually kind of to their detriment. There's an article I was reading a few days ago about Google employees actually forming a union. Not a union in a traditional sense, which was labor rights or for extra pay or things like that. The actual example was that they want Google to not be evil. So there was a few examples, for example, where they were working with the Pentagon on drone strikes. They paid out an executive after a sexual harassment case. They were going to build a censored search engine for China. And yeah, the employees basically banded together to not let the company do that, which was an amazing view of making sure people understood why the business exists. Second one was that, again, the customers, being focused on your customers. If you can think about your customers and keep them in your mindset, if you set out with the customer as your goal, keep that going forward. And another one was the employee experience. Now, really, this was about keeping the entrepreneurial spirit in your employees, providing them what they call the voice and choice. So making sure that those employees actually get a voice in the company and have unusual creativity and autonomy. So they maintain their spirit and soul of the company. Now, both Frederick and Galati actually talk to, really it's innovation, adaptability, mutual understanding of the vision and mission, being open and honest about who you are as a company is really, and a customer-centric approach is really the best way to maintain that soul, really drive that company forward. Now, if we look at what that actually means, is you have a dichotomy of growth. You've got to grow. If you want to grow, generally it's going to mean you add more people. You add people, you add process, you add structure, but you need to remain agile through that process. And you can imagine that going forward, as your investors increase, as your company grows in size, as you hire the wrong people, you hire the right people, you have an IT department who everyone hates, it all happens. But trying to keep that company spirit together while you do all the other things you need to do, get more finance, keep your customers happy, fight your legal battles, all the rest, really means you need to keep an uncompromising focus on the vision, the mission, the strategy, which are the what of what you're going to do, but then the how, making sure you focus on the how. And that leads into what about the entrepreneur? So the entrepreneur themselves, there's some choices they need to make in terms of, do they actually remain with and involved with the venture? Does their passion lie elsewhere? And should they seek outside help going forward? What does that mean for that entrepreneur? Now, whilst exceptions exist, and some entrepreneurs are amazingly successful through their lives. Think about Bill Gates, think about Steve Jobs. They have had challenges as well. They didn't all grow from a small startup into a massive company without changing themselves as well. And most fail. Absolutely, the research says that most entrepreneurs fail at least a few times, maybe every time. And potentially a reason for that is you've got your idea and what your company look like in the market, but also the entrepreneur's skill set for creating that venture is not necessarily the same as what you need for a growing organization. And the habits and skills that entrepreneurs have can actually undermine the ability to lead larger organizations. You think about entrepreneurs, you think about their single mindset, you think about their passion and their drive. Does that really relate to a company with 1,000 people in it with different issues going forward? Now, when an entrepreneur goes through the process of growth, they're actually challenged by what Frederick calls the management transition. And that's where that company changes from being focused on the entrepreneur to more of a traditional company. All the things you expect from a traditional company. And through that process, if that leader doesn't grow effectively, what the research says is that the company's not going to go beyond the level of that owner. So if that entrepreneur stays the same, single mindset, etc., the company's not going to grow. When we look at what should an entrepreneur do to adapt to that, really it's several sessions here. One is transferring their spirit of innovation to their employees. Really, they can't always be that entrepreneur they were before. Everyone loves to go off and do the fun stuff, but if you're running a major company, it's not your job anymore in some ways. But it is a job of your company. So it's really passing that spirit of information onto your employees. You need to build the skill set to be a leader. I mean, if you're at your role, your attitude and behavior. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you're probably not dealing with HR issues and the government and the bankers and everyone else on a day-to-day basis, and the standard rigmarole we all go through in large companies, etc. But you need to develop that skill set, which may not be part of your skill set. And you really need to be the leader the company needs them to be. Whether that's a figurehead, whether that's someone who's right in the detail, whether that's someone who more likely leads a whole bunch of other people to do the work that entrepreneur used to do. It's an interesting concept, and it's certainly a change that needs to happen, but that entrepreneur needs to, I guess, maintain that spirit, but also get used to the admin that comes with running a big company. It's unavoidable, but part of that is also hiring the right people. So hiring the right people who can actually do the things that you can't do, but importantly to learn off them. And what we talk about there is effectively leaders can have tendencies which can cause them to fail going forward. Some of the great things they're amazing at when they first start up can actually become their Achilles heel. So you think about, there's 4 lists out there from Ham, which are the loyalty to comrades. So those people who are along there at the very start of your ride as creating entrepreneurship, you may find extreme loyalty to them, but that may not suit going forward. That task orientation, so being an entrepreneur, doing that one thing, doing it brilliantly, may not suit going forward. Single-mindedness, I'm going to get this done, and this is what I think needs to be done, rather than what's good for the company. Also working in isolation. A lot of entrepreneurs, it's the way their brains work. They know the best things. They work in isolation. That means they may not be talking to their employees, their investors, their customers, and understanding what's going on. So going forward, there are suggestions of what should happen, what the entrepreneur should do. Now what we have here is that effectively it's about that journey the entrepreneur needs to go through. Some of the suggestions are listening and seeking input from others. So really listening to others. There are people around you with more experience, less experience, different experience, but things you can learn how and let you adapt. Dealing honestly with problems and non-performers. So it kind of links back to that loyalty discussion we had a second ago, where if those people who you may feel amazingly loyal to from your previous history as an entrepreneur are no longer suited, dealing with that straight away, not just leaving it there to fester on the vine effectively. And changing your allegiance. So entrepreneurs obviously have a massive, allegiance to their idea, to their concept, to their vision, what they want to deliver. But going forward, you're actually got a company, and now it's about your allegiance not only to your venture, but to your shareholders, your employees, your customers, and then learning to communicate with those diverse groups. So coming out of your own shell, that sort of working in isolation, to be able to communicate with a diverse group of stakeholders. I think the best example I always think about that was when Mark Zuckerberg went in front of the Standard investigation, and everyone kind of joked he looked like a robot. I don't know if he quite got there in terms of being able to talk with diverse stakeholders, but certainly it's changed since he was before. I remember watching the TV, the movie that came out as well. He didn't seem very socially adept, but he's obviously improved, but there's still obviously learnings that can go. There was some advice that came from Ning as well, which is don't take the world on at once. An entrepreneur loves to take on the world. That's kind of what you do. But setting incremental goals and milestones and providing an achievable roadmap. There's going to be a huge amount of challenges going forward, building a company, dealing with everything else. Don't take it all at once, but turn it into incremental steps. Keep it simple and straightforward. Being able to explain what your venture is, being able to explain how the world works. If your thing is so complex that no one can understand it, you're not going to buy in. So how do you keep your venture, how do you keep your idea crisp and understandable? And know thyself and the other. So you need to know your weaknesses, know your strengths, but also know your competition as well. So know both yourself, your competitors, the market, and everyone else around you. So how do you know as much as you can about how people will react and how you'll react as well? Now, in conclusion, both the entrepreneur and the company require development and change for success. It's not just the company, it's not just the entrepreneur, it's both. You need a clear focus on the what and the how. So you need to have a strategy that's planned out, but also how you execute that strategy, how you develop as a person, how the company develops. Not just the company must sell 3,000 units, but the company must have an environment that allows people to innovate, that allows change. Because you may not sell those 3,000 units, you may need to pivot to do something else to get to that number you need. Following that adaptive business strategy and that how, so really making sure that you have a business set up to modify, to change, to adapt, to flex where it's needed. And really, if it was really that simple, everyone would do it. So there is definitely some secret sauce in how you do this, but being mindful, being self-aware, and understanding is definitely the key learning from the research. And just to complete on a Q&A, when I think about this, I think about some of the key entrepreneurs we talk about, Elon Musk, we talk about Mark Zuckerberg, we talk about Steve Jobs. I like to think about what sort of transition they went through. There's an image on the left, which is Silicon Valley, which is sort of an entrepreneurial TV show you may or may not have seen, but they all kind of grew up in their kitchen coding this massively successful program. These are people with limited social skills, or some with too many social skills. You've seen the show, but just imagining what that transition looked like and what we can learn from their transition as well. I remember looking at those geeky photos of Steve Jobs and of Bill Gates, and then they're much more advanced as people, as personalities nowadays, and just wondering what journey they went through. Did they follow the advice that we got in the notes? Did they do their own path? It's an interesting thought, and it's something I'd like to think about, and hopefully remain self-aware and mindful on my journey going forward as well.